Hello, respected viewers. It's George from Isla. So welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm commenting on the financial crisis afflicting several British universities. I don't wish to overstate this. There are about 140 universities in the United Kingdom, and there's only a handful face this existential crisis to do with funding. Now, that's because I think it's 2017, if I remember this correctly. Fees certainly in England, maybe not the whole of the UK, for home undergraduates are capped at £9,250 per annum. Now, a home student in the United Kingdom is someone who's lived in the UK for at least 3 years before he or she begins university. It doesn't matter what nationality you are. If you're Japanese, if you're Paraguayan, so long as you lived in the UK for at least 3 years before you started, you're a home student. And an international student is someone who lived outside of the UK for any part of the 3 years prior to commencing a course at a British university. So even if you are British, if you lived in Bahrain, if you lived in Mexico or something, for any part of 3 years before you commence your course, then you're an international student. Now, it's a bit complicated because what if you are from England but studying in Scotland? I don't quite understand it. If you're from Northern Ireland but studying in Wales and vice versa. I'm mainly looking at England because that's like 83% of the UK population. But £9,250 per annum. So fees, universities can charge less. They may charge as little as 6,000, and frankly, the no good ones do. There have been league tables published for decades, ranking them sort of number 1 to number 140. You can look at the overall league table, and surprise, surprise, Oxford and Cambridge usually come top. But some people that's not useful. One of my friends who taught law at one of the London universities say we've got to break it down by subject. You know, a certain university might be very difficult for geography, but quite easy for Spanish, for instance. I knew a student who was a complete dunderhead in this nincompoop got the University of Birmingham, quite well rated, you know, maybe in the top 40, but maybe to do. I mean, the thing is, medicine's very difficult to do anywhere, and there are only a few universities do that, maybe roughly 40. Russian was only offered at 16 universities in the UK a few years ago. I suspect it's fewer now, and so forth. All right. So what is to be done? Because I remember when those fees were introduced under New Labour, Tony Blair, 1,000 fees, then top-up fees, 3,000 quid. It's now 9,250. I have a very wealthy peer of the realm, friend of Barris, who said, well, you want to study at a top university, it's going to have to be 30 or 40 grand a year. If you want a world-class education, you simply have to accept that, you know, excellence comes at a cost. Now, the trouble with that sort of American model, these astronomical fees, is then people have this crippling debt to begin their career, and then they feel obliged to go into something which is very handsome like finance. Now, it's of course laudable to go into high finance, but there are also careers which are not so lucrative, which are socially useful or whatever. Remember, education is about learning, not earning. If you really want to make money, just set up a business when you're 18. Why do bankers necessarily have to have degrees? They didn't until recent times. We'll look at some stats, how it's changed. If you go back to the 19th century, been under 1% of people went to university. Obviously, female tertiary education didn't even exist in the United Kingdom until 1855. The UK being the second country in the world to permit women to attend university, the USA being the first. And then it was about 2% shortly after the Second World War. 1963, it was 4% of young people went to university in the United Kingdom, 4%. When Maggie Thatcher became Prime Minister in 1979, it was 10% went to university. Admittedly, there were also polytechnics, and they were on top of that. Polytechnics were not universities. 1992, there were roughly 40 universities and 40 polytechnics. John Major, who was a complete ignoramus, this uneducated chap, he rebaptized all those polytechnics as universities. Polytechnics could offer a bachelor's degree as their highest qualification, couldn't offer master's degrees or doctorates. They could offer NVQ, General National Vocational Qualification, or HND, Higher National Diploma, and so forth. But from 1992, they all became universities. Like most UK cities have got 2 universities, an old one and a university status prior to 1992, and a new one was a polytechnic granted university status in 1992, or indeed founded subsequently. Take Oxford, there's Oxford University, and there's Oxford Brookes University, which is the former polytechnic. The one with the longer name is the former polytechnic. Glasgow University was a university before. Adonian Polytechnic till then became a university after that. So now 55% of young people go to university, 55%. It is ludicrous. We don't have that many graduate jobs. And people say, oh, it's to make us better off. Tony saying education it's the best economic policy we have. Well, no, it isn't. And there's this fixation with quantity over quality, with keeping as many people in education as long as possible, instead of providing them with an excellent education, but for fewer years. Everybody has a ceiling in certain subjects. I have a ceiling in, say, physics or anything technological, very low ceiling. By the age of whatever, 14, I just couldn't advance. There's no use of that kind of stuff. Even the best teacher in the world. Other people have ceilings in languages or humanities subjects or whatever that are very low. And there's no point flogging a dead horse. It's humiliating them and tormenting them by making them try to do what they can never do. Instead of punishing them for something they can't achieve, let's achieve. And that's why most people leaving school much younger, a few at 14, going into work, but because of their age, they could only work, say, 20 hours a week, have some organized sports or other activities for them a lot of the rest of the time. More people leaving school at 16. And again, maybe working, say, 30 hours a week, some organized sports or fun activities for them to develop in other ways the rest of the time, and obviously only doing a 40-hour week from the age of 18. So I'd have far fewer people going to university. I have been like, Cassandra, saying this is lunacy, it's a huge waste of money. And so the average person graduates in the UK £45,000 in debt. 45,000 quid. Okay, so 9,000 and some odd pounds times 3, or occasionally 4. Some bachelor's degree courses are 4 years. By the way, if you fail a dropout, you still owe the money. Now, you only have to start paying it back when you start earning over 25 grand. And now you have to pay back over 40 years. Anything not repaid after 40 years is written off. The government estimates most of the debt will never, ever be repaid. And we're not showing it on the deficit, but it is a deficit. The government pays you up front and you have to subsequently. Now, repayments are easily avoided by leaving the country. So take your skills that the public has paid for and use them elsewhere and elsewhere. They'll send you nasty, threatening letters, but there's nothing they can do to make you cough up. So it's an inane system. So how do we rationalize it so that that the university is accessible for people from all socioeconomic backgrounds? And the United Kingdom has the skill sets it needs, that it's not crippling to the taxpayer. One of the arguments for fees was, why should someone on minimum wage who didn't pursue higher education, why should he or she have to pay for someone who did, who then reaps the financial benefit? I remember the late unlamented Viscount Stansgate of unhappy and inglorious memory, who went by the sobriquet Tony Benn. That commie saying, but when I go to my doctor, I benefit from her education. Well, yeah, he chose the most unrepresentative possible example. And if you choose someone who did whatever, far left indoctrination studies, and is then unemployed and protesting all the time, or just on benefits, or a criminal, how does that benefit me? It doesn't. And most people are doing just non-graduate roles. Well, you don't need a degree to do all sorts of jobs. And where the labor shortages in the UK, that got people who are willing to pick fruit, to be construction workers, to be farm laborers, to be waiters, waitresses, chambermaids, and so forth. So we're not all intellectuals. Let's stop trying to intellectualize everything and accept that. And then you look at lists of countries and university attendance rates. Republic of Ireland, we're one of the highest in the world. Hurrah. Okay, well, we're not all geniuses, but for IQ, we're fairly high. But by letting more people in university, we just let people of lower ability in. I mean, it's a no-brainer. And okay, there is, maybe it does educate people, and people achieve more through more education. You can sharpen your ratio-sensitive skills, you become better informed and so forth, but only up to a point. There is some natural aptitude, and you can only go so far when you lack that. You can't tell someone like me, who's woeful at chemistry, into someone who's very good at it. I might go from terrible to mediocre, and so on. So there are countries with higher university attendance rates, which are worse economy than the UK, or the countries lower university attendance rate like Germany with a better economy than the United Kingdom. So it's really not the case that there's some sort of equation between the number of people you send to university and then the economic outcomes you get there from. And it's actually making the economy worse by wasting huge amounts of money, building loads of lecture halls and so on, building lots of halls of residence for the undergraduates to live in, which are only occupied half the year. And that's a big waste of accommodation. And they're just Maoist madrasas. It's just ultra-left indoctrination, wokery. Now, no wonder leftist politicians want this, because they think that they're churning more leftist voters, and they are not mistaken in that supposition, because the more education you have, the more likely you are to be anti-conservative. So it's all very dreadful. What would be done? I would let these universities go bust. It's for their own hubris. Now, to make themselves financially viable, they're taking more postgraduates because there's no cap on the fees there. They're taking more international undergraduates because, again, there's no cap on the fees there. And those are subsidizing everybody else. Take Oxford University, admittedly extreme example. The 1-year MBA at Oxford University, guess how much that costs? Come on, guess. How much? 1-year MBA. £79,000. Now, a lot of that is then used as a subvention for the rest of the university. The university is not breaking even. So I think it would be no pity if some of these went bust. System would rationalize. It's been a bit of a bubble, putting more and more money into it, assuming the value could be going up and up. But being a graduate is not. There are many graduates doing minimum wage jobs as shop assistants, waitresses, all sorts. What's this all about? Qualification inflation, because having a bachelor's degree is an entry level job, entry level qualification for so many jobs, any sort of office job. You're assuming that you can't read and write if you don't have a degree, and so people say, well, I have to go one further, have a master's degree. That's not well good enough. I have to go on further, have a doctorate, and so on, and it's insane. So we just need a far more sensible system of not, 55% of young people at university. I don't know what the ideal percentage is, much lower, 25%, 20%, something like that. About 2% of people do doctorates. I don't think that's really a problem. They're usually self-funding. And there should be no public funding for things unless this is a manifest for public benefit, like, medicine or some sort of research science. And the fees, under Labour, they said, okay, the nurses don't have to pay university fees because we so desperately need them. And the Tories scrapped that, which surprise there's a shortage of nurses. And so we don't need to have tons. British people should have to do these low paid jobs. You'll work, you'll starve. That's it. Maggie Thatcher, the Sermon on the Mount. Those who do not work shall not eat, she quoted St. Paul. Being on benefits is not a career. Because the British people who refuse to do these jobs, it's beneath them, I'll just go on benefits, is obviously tied to this entitlement, which comes from having been a snowflake at university. I'm not saying that all people in their 20s or teens are snowflakes, absolutely not. There always were some snowflakes, but I think it's got worse. All this, what's the word, valetudinarianism because of wokery. So yeah, the fees, I do feel sorry for people having to pay massive fees. But if we had a very small percentage of people going to university, we could go back to what we had in the 90s, no fees whatsoever for your first bachelor's degree. If you want to do a master's degree, usually there are fees, a few scholarships. If you drop out of that bachelor's degree, want to start again, you pay fees. If you fail, want to start again, you pay fees. The funds are limited. And remember, in the early 90s, there were grants for all. Even your parents were multimillionaires. Here's money to live off. It's not a loan, it's a grant. And that is affordable, but only if we make the numbers sensible. And so a heavier and heavier burden on the fewer people working and people living longer and longer. It's terrible. And elderly people, contribution to society, all this stuff for people in their teens and 20s. Admittedly, people in their teens and 20s got a pretty bleak outlook with, real wages much lower than they were even 15 years ago, with the cost of living higher, with mortgages virtually unobtainable unless you're a banker wanker, things like that. So what do you think the United Kingdom should do about universities? Should it these universities? It's a dilemma in Keir Starmer's in tray, because all these lefty dons are going to say, oh, you have to save us from these savage Tory cuts. And there's just no money in the kitty. And then Middle Britain is going to say, no, we shouldn't be saving these Marxist madrasas. Let them go bust. It doesn't benefit us at all. Let's do something with public money which actually helps people and hire more doctors and nurses. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate on PayPal. GeorgeCallahan79@gmail.com. Toodle pip.